Hello and welcome. I'm Philip Lipsy, the Richard Lee Director of the Asian Institute here at the University of Toronto. Welcome to today's event featuring Chris Horton's new book, Ghost Nation, the Story of Taiwan and its Struggle for Survival. I'd like to extend my thanks to the Asian Institute and Munk School event staff for their administrative support of today's event, and to the Global Taiwan Studies Initiative for their joint sponsorship of today's event. Before we begin, we wish to acknowledge the land on which the University of Toronto operates. For thousands of years, it has been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and the Mississaugas of the Credit. Today, this meeting place is still the home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we're very grateful to have the opportunity to work on this land. Our speaker today is Chris Horton, a journalist who has been based in Taiwan since 2015, covering the country's foreign relations, domestic politics, economy, society, and many more topics. Chris's writing has appeared in numerous high-impact outlets, including the New York Times, Nikkei Asia, Bloomberg, The Atlantic, Financial Times, The Guardian, among many, many others. And he is, of course, the author of the book, Ghost Nation, which will be the topic of our conversation today. I'm also delighted to introduce Joe Wong, who will serve as the discussant. Obviously, he's familiar to many of you in the audience. He's the professor in the Department of Political Science and serves as Vice President International at our university. He was the director of the Asian Institute here from 2005 to 2014, as well as the Ralph and Roz Halbert Professor of Innovation at the Munk School until 2023, among many other important roles. He's an expert in comparative public policy and political economy with numerous articles and books directly related to today's topic. And I won't go through the list because we'll stay here all day, but they include From Development to Democracy, The Transformation of Modern Asia from Princeton University Press, as well as Betting on Biotech, Innovation and the Limits of Asia's Developmental State from Cornell in 2011, among many, many others. And a note to the audience, the event will conclude at 5:30 p.m., after which Chris will be doing a book signing over in the library right next door across the aisle. So if you have some time after the event, please feel free to stay and enjoy some light refreshments as well as the book signing. So with that, please join me in welcoming Chris Horton to the podium.
Thank you all. Thank you, Professors Lipsky and Wong, for inviting me here. It's great to be in Toronto, my first time here. So yeah, let's get into it. Taiwan. All right, so one thing that everyone knows about Taiwan is that Beijing claims it as its own territory. And this is a photo that a journalist friend based in Beijing took from the Great Hall of the People in Beijing. In the Great Hall of the People, there's pavilions for each administrative region of the People's Republic of China. And this is the Taiwan Pavilion. And if you can read Chinese and you can see, it has the phrase, Taiwan has, since time immemorial, or since ancient times, Taiwan has been China's sacred territory. And we're going to examine the truth of that statement in this presentation. So this is a Dutch painting of indigenous Taiwanese from 1670. It's one of the earliest images of indigenous Taiwanese or people living on Taiwan. The original inhabitants of Taiwan are Austronesian speaking peoples. And right now, I think there's about 16 officially recognized ethnic groups that are indigenous Taiwanese, but you know, this is kind of, as in China and other countries, it's whittling down things to you know, making groups that maybe might not naturally be together, just probably for administrative purposes. But yeah, the first people to arrive and set up the first outsiders to arrive and set up permanent settlements in Taiwan were the Dutch, and they arrived 401 years ago. It was the Dutch East India Company that arrived. It was the world's first stock company, and they arrived in what is now Tainan in the southwest of Taiwan. Actually, that same year, the Dutch West India Company arrived in Manhattan and set up their first settlement there. And Taiwan and Manhattan, both these names are indigenous names that were originally transcribed by the Dutch. So Taiwan, which means platform bay in Mandarin, there's no platform bay that I'm aware of. There's no big bays in Taiwan. It's a name that came from the Sarayan people who inhabited the area now known as Tainan. And yeah, there was also a period of, so this was the initial phase of colonization of what was then known as Formosa. And it was it's kind of referred to as double colonization because the Ming Dynasty was falling apart. Indigenous people didn't want to work for the Dutch East India Company and be farmers for them. But for young men experiencing the collapse of the Ming in Fujian, it was a kind of like a land of opportunity. So they were economic migrants that went over, but they went over and set up their own settlements alongside the Dutch. The Dutch were only there for 38 years, but their impact on Formosa, which we now call Taiwan, was quite large. They introduced schools. They introduced the first writing. So the first writing system taught in Taiwan was not Chinese. It was the Roman alphabet, but it was Dutch. Yeah, they brought Christianity, firearms, water buffalo, mangoes. So we have mango ice in Taiwan, thanks to the Dutch. I'm sure mangoes would have made it there eventually, but the Dutch had their regional headquarters in Batavia on Java, which is now known as Jakarta. And it turned out that Dutch Formosa ended up being a very profitable enterprise. It was making more money for the company than Batavia was by the end of it. The Spanish, who were the Dutch rivals, they settled in the north, mostly to keep an eye on the Dutch. The Dutch were in Java, as I mentioned, and the Spanish were in the Philippines. So they were always kind of, there was a bit of friction, bit of a rivalry there. So the Dutch the Spanish were only around for 20, 30 years. The Dutch lasted 38 years, but eventually they were overthrown by a man called Koxinga, also known as Zheng Chenggong. And he defeated the Dutch in 1662. And his story is interesting. His father, Zheng Zhilong, was a Fujianese pirate, and his mother was Japanese. And he had tried to take Nanjing from the Ming, but he failed. And so from the Qing, but he failed. He decided, he regrouped in what is now known as Jinmen, or Kinmen, Quemoy. And then he decided he was going to go to one of his father's old haunts, Taiwan. And he attacked the Dutch settlement, the Dutch capital of Dutch Formosa at Zealandia, as Tainan was then known. And after a long siege, he succeeded, ran the Dutch out, and then he established he died pretty quickly afterwards, I believe from malaria. And his son and then his grandson succeeded him, but it was only a 21-year dynasty. And if you look at the map, you can see much smaller than what the Dutch had, or even what the Spanish had. And I think it's worth noting right now, just I don't have a topographical map of Taiwan here, but basically the left-hand side, the west side, the western third of Taiwan, that's coastal plain. It's all quite low. And then the 2/3 on so the center third and the western third, that's all very rugged mountainous terrain. It's very beautiful if you've ever been there, but yeah, difficult to get around in, even in a car sometimes. So historically, most of the colonization was done on the West Coast, as you may have noticed from the last two maps. And it's worth mentioning that the Dongning Kingdom, as the Koxinga clans, the Zheng clans kingdom was called, it's held up as one of the pieces of evidence that Taiwan has always been Chinese, but it's quite small. Koxinga was half Japanese, and it was only around for 21 years before the Manchu Qing dynasty, which had already conquered China, arrived in Taiwan. They overthrew the Dongning, and this is so they were there for quite a while, 1683 to 1895. But in the beginning, like as this shows, the Kangxi Emperor wasn't really impressed with Taiwan. He called it a ball of mud beyond the seas. The Qing loosely governed Taiwan, and they expanded their governance of Taiwan. And it was mostly through Taiwanese gentry, locally powerful families, that they administered the coastal plain areas. So the black and the gray areas here, those are basically, those were left to, those were unconquered areas that were inhabited by indigenous Taiwanese. And yeah, even on the coastal plain where things were maybe more, there was more Qing control, you had regular uprisings, violent uprisings, rebellions. So there was a phrase during the Qing that every 3 years an uprising, every 5 years a rebellion. That was, this was when Taiwanese identity was already starting to become a thing. And I think the democratization of Taiwan that is still going on today, it really started during the Qing. That was when you first had people that were native to Taiwan, whether or not they were indigenous or of Chinese descent from Fujian. They started to resent these outsiders, kind of telling them what to do. And but eventually the Qing started to feel, with the rise of Japan and also other colonial powers making more inroads into Eastern and Southeast Asia, you ended up having the Qing starting to realize the strategic importance and value of Taiwan. And so they made it a province in 1885. And they only kept it, or they decided to make it a province in 1885, but it officially became one in 1887. And then in 1895, after the Qing lost their war with Japan, they ceded through the Treaty of Shimonoseki, they ceded Taiwan to the Japanese Imperial Japan in perpetuity. But it was also worth noting, during this period, the Qing period, you had multiple waves of Chinese coming over from Fujian, and this also included Hakka, who currently make about 15% of the population, but politically, I think 3 of the 5 democratically elected presidents of Taiwan have had some Hakka heritage. So they punch above their weight in terms of their demographic representation. So the Republic of Formosa, the briefest of the governments that have existed on Taiwan, it only existed for a few months. It was basically after Japan was given Taiwan by the Qing. Some Qing loyalists, I think the former Governor General of Qing Taiwan, he was the first leader the only leader of the Republic of Formosa, which bequeathed to us one of the cooler flags in Asian history, I would say. So you had this situation where Japan had been given Taiwan by some people who didn't really totally control it, and then they had to actually fight to take control. So it was a several months long war, but it would take 20 more years for the Imperial Japanese Army, which was, it was battle tested and not afraid to use extreme violence. It would take 20 years for them to conquer the entire island, because those, again, the mountains are super rugged, and the indigenous Taiwanese were fierce warriors. They make a disproportionate number of today's special forces in the ROC military. They're also very well known for as baseball players. Some of the best Taiwanese baseball players are indigenous. So yeah, after everything after everyone was subdued, Taiwan became a showcase colony for the Japanese Empire, who was promoting the East Asian shared co-prosperity sphere. It just rolls off the tongue. Yeah, it ended up being a springboard for conquest of southern China and Southeast Asia, highlighting Taiwan's strategic importance at the crossroads of Japan, China, and Southeast Asia. And while Japan did lots of awful things to people in Taiwan, it also did bring Taiwan into modernity. It was the first government to unify Taiwan administratively, but it also brought education, including education for women, which arrived earlier than in the home islands of Japan. So it's kind of like a special education zone or something like that. Industrial development, healthcare and hygiene, rule of law. But of course, Taiwanese were not allowed to have any say in their own government, whether it was in Taiwan or in the Diet in Tokyo. And here we have a photo of the presidential office building of the ROC, which was originally built by Japan in Taipei, then known as Taihoku. And it was the Governor General's building. So the top colonial administrator used to work in that building where now President Lai Ching-te works. So I think one thing that one thing that Taiwan gets accused of is being toadies to the Americans and the Japanese, but the facts speak otherwise. One of the more interesting examples is Xie Wenda, the first Taiwanese aviator. When he was like 16, he was living in Taichu, as Taichung was then known, and he saw an American stunt pilot named Art Smith. This is like 14 years after the Wright brothers had their first flight. He saw an American stunt pilot named Art Smith doing an aerobatics show, and he was like, I want to do that. And his high school principal had connections to the Ito Aviation Academy in Japan, close to Tokyo, and he went there to study. He came back. He was kind of like not a national hero, because Taiwan was just Japanese Formosa at the time, but he became a local hero, and he was held up by the Japanese as like, look, we're letting you guys do some stuff too, and there was a physician who was advocating for home rule for Taiwan, or greater self-rule and representation in the government for Taiwanese people. His name is Jiang Weishui, and Jiang Weishui saw Xie Wenda doing his thing, and he was like, I want to work with this kid. He crowdsourced enough money to buy an airplane, which was it was christened the Taipei Hao. And what Xie did when Xie Wenda was 23, it was in 1923. I think he was 20 at the time. So pretty young, pretty gutsy. He flew over Tokyo and with an unknown friend, and his buddy dropped tens of thousands of leaflets on downtown Tokyo, buzzing the metropole. And the leaflets said, you guys are, so proud of your constitution and, your civilization, but yet you treat us like this, why is that? Maybe have to think about that. So it was like, kind of trying to shame the Japanese into like, giving Taiwanese people a bit more respect and a bit more say in their daily lives. It didn't work. He flew back to Taipei, and he got a dressing down by the Japanese Governor General at the time, and then he decided, probably wisely, to flee to China. But his, the crowd-funded plane, his willingness to fly over Tokyo, I mean, he could have been shot down. It really shows that you're starting to see this strong Taiwanese identity take hold. And to this day, Taiwanese are quite good at crowdfunding and allocating money towards things that can raise their profile and raise awareness of their situation. So after the Japanese surrendered in 1945, we entered the Jiang dynasty. The arrival of the ROC, the Republic of China, in 1945. So that's Chiang Kai-shek seated there, and that's his son, Jiang Jingguo, who is standing there. And they basically ruled from 1945 until 1987. And with the arrival of the ROC in 1945, you have the beginning of the first 4 years of, the only 4 years in all of human history in which a Han Chinese government controlled all of Taiwan. A Han Chinese government based in China. You know, that's only 4 years, and you know the claim that you know Zigui Lai, since time immemorial, you know, Taiwan has always been part of China. This doesn't really jive with that so much. When the Republic of China arrived, it imposed Mandarin as the official language of Taiwan, and nobody spoke Mandarin except for the KMT and the people who arrived with the KMT. Most people spoke Japanese as well as Taiwanese Hakka or indigenous languages. So that was pretty, I think, jarring for Taiwanese people. They have a new government and they can't understand they have to learn a new language to understand what they're being told. The US, they had brought Chiang over. So 1949, you have the, okay, no, sorry. There's just too much in this period. Sorry. So during the first couple of years of KMT rule of Taiwan, you had not only this new language imposed on people, but there was massive theft. So the KMT was dealing with a communist rebellion that would eventually succeed, and they were taking everything they could from Taiwan and throwing it at the war on the other side of the strait. Also, corruption, breakdown of social order, you know, laws weren't being obeyed or enforced. I think within the first year of KMT rule, Taiwanese experienced the return of cholera and bubonic plague, both of which have been gone for decades under Japanese rule, and then also the price of rice skyrocketed. So there were, you know, people were not pleased. There was actually a lot of optimism initially, but I think within the first couple of months, most people had soured on the KMT. And then there was an incident in late February of 1947, in which some customs officers pistol whipped a widowed mother who was selling contraband cigarettes that had been smuggled in from China. They weren't part of the tobacco monopoly, the Japanese tobacco monopoly that had been taken over by the KMT there. And so they tried to confiscate her cigarettes. She wouldn't let go. They hit her. She was bleeding. People gathered around. This was outside a popular tea house, the Pegasus Tea House, Tianma. And basically one of the customs officers, probably scared, rightfully scared, but he shot his gun into the crowd, hit one man in the stomach who died later. The officers ran to a police station. The crowd went to the police station to try to get, they wanted justice. The police told everyone to go home. The next day there was a big demonstration, a big march into the city, into the heart of the city. And the crowd, the angry crowd, stopped by a customs office and killed many Chinese people who were working there, and flipped cars over, burned everything they could. And then they proceeded to what is now the Executive Yuan, and they wanted to petition for greater, they wanted a lot of change. And they were shot by KMT soldiers who were mounted, or who were standing on top of the Executive Yuan. Some of the people in the crowd went to the island's radio station, broke in, and it was a Mandarin broadcast suddenly interrupted, and in the Taiwanese language, basically explaining what had just happened and calling for rebellion. And so this led to basically in the next day or two, every major city in Taiwan had a violent uprising where many Chinese people were killed by Taiwanese people. A week later, Chiang Kai-shek sent troops to Taiwan. They landed in Keelung and Kaohsiung, and during that time, about 30,000 people were killed in about 3 weeks, and it was the diplomats that were there were sending cables back to their capitals, talking about all kinds of horrible things. But yeah, what these killings targeted especially were people who could have led an independent and self-ruled Taiwan. So civil servants, judges, lawyers, doctors, highly educated people, and anybody who was involved in anti-KMT activities. So in 1949, the Changs lose China, escape to Taiwan, and then that begins 38 years of white terror, which is what the period of martial law in Taiwan was known as. And so this was targeting not just Taiwanese who wanted to get rid of the ROC, but also Chinese who were suspected of potentially being communist infiltrators. So the first few years, there were in the early 50s, there were a lot of executions, but that tapered off, and it ended up being more like torture and imprisonment, but still brutal period, hundreds of thousands of people imprisoned. So 1971, China still the ROC, despite having no presence in China, still somehow has the Security Council seat for China in the UN, and they finally lost it. Chiang Kai-shek was unwilling to accept a two-state solution where the ROC gets a Taiwan seat. His son was kind of like, Dad, I'm going to be running this later. Could we maybe think about that Taiwan seat? But Chiang was obstinate till the end. Chiang Kai-shek. Then Chiang Kai-shek died in 1975. Jiang Jingguo takes over. Chiang Kai-shek was a bit more of an emperor type personality. Jiang Jingguo, he was the head of internal security services for his father, but he also knew that he needed to present himself as a man of the people, and he tried to Taiwanify the KMT because there weren't enough. The KMT was getting old, and they needed young blood, and so they promoted Taiwanese wherever they could, wherever they felt like there was a good place for them. And the U.S. in 1979, in order to establish diplomatic ties with Beijing and kind of counter the Soviet Union, de-recognized the ROC, which was a huge blow to the Chiang dynasty. And in 1987, Jiang Jingguo ended martial law finally. It was the world's longest period of martial law until 2011, when Syria broke that record. Just months after that, Jiang Jingguo passed away and passed the baton to his vice president, Li Denghui. That's a Hakka man from northern Taiwan. That's him in his kendo outfit. He was very much a product of the Japanese era, and he spoke. I was the last journalist to interview him. He spoke to me in Mandarin, Taiwanese, English, and Japanese. I can speak two of those four. Luckily, I had an interpreter there. But his generation, which now has more or less passed, they were quite different. They were very much influenced by the Japanese, and they had a dim view of the KMT. So it's interesting that this Taiwanese-born Li Denghui, he managed to rise up through the ranks of the KMT all the way to vice president and eventually chairman, and then president after he succeeded Jiang Jingguo. So one of the biggest legacies. So there were two things that Li Denghui did that were that everybody I think knows about. One was he kind of as a result of some protests in Taipei, some student protests, he decided to allow elections. So the first elections in Taiwan, the first legislative elections were in 1992. First presidential election was in 1996. He won that. And the second thing was he when it was time for him to step down, he appointed Lian Zhan as the KMT's candidate for the 2000 presidential election, and that really upset James Song, who was the guy who kind of helped him get the presidency, because there were people in the KMT who were like, we can't trust this Li guy. He's Taiwanese, he's probably got his own agenda. They were right. Yeah, so anyways, James Song was upset, and so he ran as an independent, and that split the blue vote. The blue vote being like the kind of ethnic Chinese vote, you know, green being like more of an Taiwanese identity. So that's the political spectrum basically. You've got green and blue, not liberal and conservative. On both sides, there's liberals and conservatives. Anyways, Li Donghui, yeah, he split the blue vote, which led to the next slide. But one thing I do want to mention, when I interviewed Li, I asked him, you know, what are you most proud of? And I was assuming he was going to say, I delivered, I was the midwife for Taiwan's democracy. And he said he was most proud of nationalizing the military. So at that point, and it caught me off guard, but it makes total sense. You can't have democracy if a party controls the entire military. So as the PRC is today, that's how the ROC was back then. You had basically the ROC military was the armed wing of the KMT. Today, the People's Liberation Army is the armed wing of the CCP. So that created, you know, you basically had authoritarianism on both sides of the strait at that time, but this is where you really start to see some divergence. Okay, so the first DPP president arrives in 2000, former Taipei mayor and a lawyer who was very famous for defending some of the biggest political prisoners in Taiwan, in modern Taiwanese history, Chen Shui-bian, also known as Abian. That's him with his wife, Wu Shuzhen, and you know, they're on their way to his inauguration in 2000. It's a very sweet photo. She's actually paralyzed. When he was running for Tainan City Council in I think the early 80s, don't quote me, he lost. And they were outside a temple in the Guanmiao district in Tainan, rural Tainan, thanking voters, which is something that, you know, winners and losers all thank the voters in Taiwan. It's very, very nice to see. But anyways, she was able to walk then, and a truck came out of nowhere, like kind of a farm truck, not a big truck as we would think, but like something like a large tractor. It ran over her, backed over her, and ran over her again. She's very lucky to not have died, but well, the driver was arrested. He was then released. Nothing wrong. You know, people on the green side are convinced that it was intentional. Guess we'll never know for sure, but it didn't look very good. Yeah, and so the second image that you have there is after Chen Shui-bian's 8 years. So during his 8 years, he did a lot to promote a Taiwanese identity. He changed the curriculum in like high school textbooks to include Taiwanese history, which the KMT was furious about. He also launched a Hakka television station, an indigenous television station. He changed the name of the street in front of the presidential office from Long Live Chiang Kai-shek Boulevard to Ketagalan Boulevard, acknowledging local indigenous Taiwanese. The Ketagalan people no longer exist. And anyways, the KMT hated him. There were accusations and big protests against him towards the end of his 8 years, accusing him of corruption. And after he stepped down, he was basically arrested and put in prison for years. At one point he was losing his mind and he tried to commit suicide. Eventually he was let out on medical parole, but his rights are still limited. And yeah, some of those charges though, they have been dropped. So it's really hard to say how guilty he was, but he definitely was given a very harsh punishment. And that was under the 8 years of his successor, Ma Ying-jeou, who was born in British Hong Kong, and his father was very much a Chinese nationalist. He grew up under that ideology. He ended up being kind of a rising star in the KMT, and eventually became mayor of Taipei, and went on to become president. And so a lot of Taiwanese people voted for Ma because they thought that DPP was corrupt and incompetent, and you know, the DPP, there was corruption, and there were probably some things they could have done better. But it was also their first kind of go in running the government. And so Ma, he campaigned on let the Taiwanese people decide their own future. But as soon as he took office, he was meeting with top Chinese officials, not Xi Jinping quite yet, but Chen Yunlin from, I believe, was it TAO? Was he in Tai? Anyways, a top-ranking communist official was invited over to Taiwan by Ma and given a VIP welcome. And even so, in the areas that he went in Taipei, the ROC flag was banned from being displayed. That's the kind of reception and kind of paying attention to CCP sensitivities that Ma's administration gave them. So Ma opened up, under Ma, media was opened up to money from China or Chinese connected Taiwanese business people known as Taishan. There was also tourism and education were opened up, and a lot of commercial investment. There was a cross-strait services trade agreement in 2014 that was negotiated in Shanghai by the KMT and the CCP, and it was signed, and it was going to open up 60%. It was the services industry, the services sector of Taiwan's economy was going to open that up to basically unlimited Chinese investment. And the students were like, okay, he's just selling Taiwan. So that's where you get the image on the right, the sunflower protest, which in 2014, there was an occupation of the legislature there. And it succeeded in derailing the bill, which just had to be ratified in order to go into effect. And so that kind of marked a low point for the KMT, which then led to the election of Tsai Ing-wen, the previous president, who also was a two-term president. And on the left, you see, so she's with the DPP. She was a lawyer who under Li Denghui helped negotiate Taiwan's accession to the World Trade Organization. And so one of the first things she did as president was actually inspired by Canada and Australia, the apologies to Indigenous people. She apologized to Indigenous Taiwanese on behalf of the ROC government. But here's something she's a little more famous for, talking to Donald Trump, President-elect Donald Trump on the phone. So that's a shot from the phone call. And this marked a beginning of kind of a, she had a big task to do. She had to regain Taiwanese and American and international trust for the DPP. After what happened with Chen Shui-bian, they were kind of viewed as irresponsible, loose cannons. And her job was to convince them that the party had matured and that she was a steady pair of hands, which I think she ended up doing a pretty good job of. And one of the things that she also did was here on the right, she's trying to reestablish morale and modernize the ROC military, which basically languished for 8 years under Ma Ying-jeou, who did things like cutting conscription from 1 year to 4 months. She reinstated 1 year of conscription, and she was followed by Lai Ching-te, the current president. So that's Lai Ching-te with Xiaobi Kim, his vice president, who she's a product of Taiwanese and American parentage. Lai Ching-te, he's got a tougher situation than Tsai Ing-wen did. Tsai Ing-wen had a legislature that was controlled by the DPP, so it was very easy to push her agenda. So right now the legislature is controlled by a KMT-led coalition. And if you look to the right, that's Fu Quanqi on the left. He's a legislator from Hualien County in Taiwan's eastern side. And he's speaking with Wang Huning at the Great Hall of the People. Maybe they stopped by the Taiwan Pavilion, I don't know. But he led a delegation of 17 KMT lawmakers after the KMT achieved this majority coalition. he took a delegation to the Great Hall of the People to meet with the man that Xi Jinping has put in charge of regaining Taiwan, or at least in charge of Taiwan policy. So there's tons more that I could talk about, and I've already kind of overdone it, but once you get going, it's hard to stop talking about Taiwan. So yeah, that's it.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Philip, for moderating this. And Chris, it's terrific to see you again. Chris and I actually just saw each other a couple weeks ago, I think, at your bar, actually, in Taipei, which was a lot of fun.
There's another owner, co-owner of the bar in the
Oh,
audience
really?
as well.
Oh, okay. Oh, wonderful. Excellent. It's really a pleasure and privilege to have you here, Chris. And I think also speaking for some of the incredible journalists who are in Taiwan right now. Over the last 10 years or so, as the screws have been tightened in Hong Kong, for instance, many journalists have now left Taiwan and found refuge, if you will, in Taiwan. And there's just this incredible groundswell of extraordinary journalistic talent in Taiwan right now. I have to say that, every time I visit Taiwan, one of the things that I first do is call up my journalist friends and essentially ask them what's going on, right? They know everybody better than we do. Many of them speak Chinese better than we do. They have better connections than we do, and they have their finger on the pulse of what's going on in Taiwan better than most of us do. What I love about this book, though, is that someone like Chris, and I remember actually it's maybe not the last election in 24, but in 2020, there was a big party on the night of the elections, as there are in Taiwan. And I remember someone saying, that's Chris Horton over there. And he was busy typing away, trying to file the story, I think, on the night of the election. Like, that's how right up to the minute their analysis are. And in a way, how very micro and how very singular the focus of their writing is at any given moment. But to have someone like Chris, who's got such great experience living in Taiwan, and the connections and the ability to interview someone like Li Donghui, which I thought was fascinating, the core message that he sent you, to be able to then actually take that very focused kind of lens and actually cast it wide is really extraordinary. Many of us don't have the knowledge to do that. Many of us certainly don't have the fortitude to do that. And so I'm just so pleased by the extraordinary journalistic talent that actually is now in Taiwan. I remember there was a time when we would go for elections as foreign observers, and the Foreign Correspondents Club would have a party, and there were maybe 10 or 12 at one time. I think the last time in 24, it was at a nightclub. There were like literally hundreds of journalists descending on Taiwan to document this moment of what is always seemingly the case in Taiwan, a monumental election. So as a political scientist and someone who's long been interested in Taiwan, I've had the privilege of actually being part of these foreign election observer delegations since all the way in 2000. And so listening to Chris do a kind of a chronological rundown actually evoked a lot of memories for me and real pivotal moments in Taiwan's democratization. One I often reference, and indeed inspired the last book I wrote with Dan Slater on democracy in Asia, was when Chen Shui-bian was elected. On the night that he was elected, I remember being at the rally, which is one of the signature events of Taiwan's democracy, being at the rally and watching him being escorted to the stage by the very security apparatus that had imprisoned him, right? A few decades before, and his comrades. And that really stuck in my mind as an extraordinarily important moment, not only what had happened in Taiwan, but really in trying to unlock what was so distinctive about Taiwan's democratization, that in many ways, the incumbent state apparatus that had been so thoroughly autocratic had now somehow ushered in what were the seeds of actually an extremely vibrant democracy. I remember when Tsai Ing-wen was elected as well, and admittedly the party went on a little long that night, but I remember Tsai Ing-wen's speech was a speech that was not actually a speech to the Taiwanese people. You recall, it was really a speech to Beijing and Washington. It was incredibly important for her to reassure the world, to reassure Washington as well, that Taiwan was a robust, flourishing democracy, but that one that would not be reckless, and that she had to go to great lengths, even in the moment of her electoral triumph, to not speak to her followers and her constituents, but actually to speak to a global constituency, which I think again speaks very much to the conundrum and the struggle for Taiwan's survival that Chris has noted. I also remember the very next day in that there are all these seminars and speaking engagements and so forth, and I participated on one, and I remember a lot of my DPP friends were celebrating, I found, in almost a grotesque kind of way. And I warned them, I said, you know, don't dance on the grave of your opponents, right? Don't dance on the grave of the KMT, even though they are your opposition, because a democracy requires an opposition. And you don't want to dance on the grave of your opposition, lest you weaken your democracy. So, you know, I think in many ways, the story that you tell of Taiwan is not so dissimilar to the story that we have here in Canada, actually. I have often thought that Taiwan's existential reality is not unlike that of us here in Canada, which is to say, it's a small country living next to an unpredictable giant. And I remember saying that in Taiwan about 15 years ago, and people said, yeah, there are 6,000 missiles pointed at us, it's slightly different. Well, at least now we can say the giant next to us is intending on annexing Canada, and we don't know quite what arsenal an unpredictable President Trump might unleash to do that. So this idea of a smallish country, and Canada geographically, of course, is huge, but in terms of a population economy, we are dwarfed by this massive, unpredictable giant. And so when I think about, well, then how does Canada remain resilient in the face of these kinds of challenges? And what kinds of lessons can we learn from Taiwan? And I think part of it is a real distinct Canadian identity, one that is increasingly complicated by our own recognition of our complicity as a settler colony, as a settler nation, as one that has brought about tremendous violence on the original settlers or the original peoples of this country, not unlike the recognition that we see Tsai Ing-wen making in her apology to the indigenous peoples of Taiwan. This is a country here as well that is built on immigration, not unlike what we see in Taiwan across a broad swath of history. But ultimately, it strikes me that our greatest strength and source of resilience is our democracy and the continued investment in our democracy here. And this is actually where I think Taiwan's chip to play is, if you will. I worry sometimes that identity politics can be ephemeral and ultimately destructive. I think it makes, and it's important for these identities, as you so nicely described, that are so rooted in history, to be in many ways the kind of raw material from which a national identity can be built. But ultimately, I think that what is going to serve both Canada and Taiwan well is the continued investment in our democracy and making our democracy as strong as possible. And in this regard, I think Taiwan actually is an extraordinary exemplary of democracy building, frankly, in a region of the world in which most scholars in the 1970s and 80s would have seen to be hostile to the emergence and eventual deepening and rooting of democracy. Most at that time understood Japan's democracy as being externally imposed by the United States, and in the complete absence of any democratic impulse on the part of even Japanese conservatives, that this was a region of the world and a cultural complex that was inhospitable to democracy. And what we actually see in Taiwan is an extraordinary, I think, rebuff to that argument. And extraordinary in the truest sense, in that what we have here is what I've already alluded to, and something that both Dan Slater and I argue, is that you actually see a regime, that is the KMT, that doesn't collapse per se, which is how we typically think of democracy arriving. That is to say, to emerge from the ashes of a collapsed regime. The only way, as many will argue, that democracy will arrive in the PRC is if and only when the CCP collapses. That's not what happens in Taiwan. In fact, you have Jiang Jingguo, who is a complicated person, absolutely reviled in many quarters. But as one of my good friends and people who absolutely revile Jiang Jingguo says, the only thing Jiang Jingguo ever did for democracy was get out of the way of pro-democracy forces, to which I think, well, it would be amazing if many other dictators around the world got out of the way of pro-democracy forces. He was no Democrat, let's be sure, and right? But nonetheless, we see a transformation in Taiwan's democracy that is quite distinctive. I remember even in my own, earlier in my career, I wrote a piece, I've forgotten what it's called now. I think it's called Deepening Democracy in Taiwan. But what I actually wanted to call it is, why is Taiwan so liberal? Right, like what is going on here? Why is Taiwan, even in the early 2000s, already considering things like same-sex marriage? Why does Taiwan universalize healthcare in 1995 when the rest of the world is essentially retrenching? Why is Taiwan moving, even then, on at least thinking about and debating alternative energies, even though it remains highly coal dependent and fossil fuel dependent and so forth? But why is Taiwan so liberal? And the answer that I came up with was that it was actually in Taiwan's best interest to be the best damn democracy in the world. And that was going to be its way to survive. And I think actually that's done a lot of good for Taiwan, and for all the reasons that Chris has already intimated. And I recommend that you read the book, because what he's done is he's scaffolded for you the historical epochs of Taiwan's political and social and economic history. But in it really is a dissertation on democracy's resilience and therefore Taiwan's resilience, and the kind of counterintuitive resilience of Taiwan's democracy over the long term. Let me finish by saying that there was a point that Chris said in passing, in which he said, democratization in Taiwan, which is still ongoing. I think that's really a critical point, not only for Taiwan, but frankly, for the rest of the world. I was on a panel recently at APSA on, it was a roundtable on democratic erosion and resilience. And I made this offhand remark. I didn't mean it to be so dreary, but I said, if democracy were to die today, it would be the shortest lived regime type in the history of human governance. In other words, that we have democracy at all actually is the historical aberration. And that if it were to die, and if democratic backsliding were to continue unabated, as it seems to be doing in many parts of the world, democracy would actually be maybe not even a footnote in the history of human governance. So when you look at the prospects of democratic resilience from that point of humility, I think, which is littered throughout the book, right? Which is what I think is so powerful about Chris's book, is that democracy really requires continual work. And this is why I don't feel so bad when I say to my DPP friends, don't celebrate by dancing on the grave of your opponents. This is why I'm not even all that comfortable with Gavin Newsom's retaliatory actions in California to redistrict in order to counter what's happening in Texas. Because I do ask myself sometimes, when Michelle Obama said, when they go low, we go high, the death knell of democracy is when they go low and we go lower, or just low enough. Now, I know that's a controversial position, and I know that many of my Democratic friends, of which I would include myself, are uncomfortable with that position. But I do worry about the resilience of democracy over the long term. And you weren't able to talk about this in your book because it had already published, but the Great Recall of this past summer was, again, I think, an extraordinary test of Taiwan's resilience. And for those who know or don't know, the Great Recall was an effort to essentially recall a series of elections in order to then, at least as it was understood by many, in order to increase the DPP seat share. And that was certainly, I think, part of the motivation among civil society organizations. Again, I completely understand and empathize in terms of what increasingly feels like the ungovernability of Taiwan. That being said, there is a shutdown of the government just south of our border right now. But I do worry that the impulse there is actually not about democratic resilience. It's not about deepening democracy, which I had written about so optimistically just 20 plus years ago. And so I think we're left with that tension. I love how you said, Chris, again, that Taiwan is democratizing, but it is still ongoing. It's a reminder that it takes work, it takes resilience, it takes biting your tongue, it takes not appeasing your most sort of based impulse, which is to dance on the grave of your enemies and your opponents, but rather recognize that there is something bigger here, which is the preservation of democracy. Strikes me that that's Taiwan's ticket to survival. That would be my thesis. I think that in many ways, your historical account takes us to a not dissimilar set of conclusions. But let me just say in closing, it is an incredibly provocative book. There are tidbits that you were presenting today that I also picked up in my read of the book that I had no idea about. And this is someone who studies that country, and your analysis, I think, is spot on. So I encourage colleagues and friends in the room, pick up the book. It's important that more of us know about the history of Taiwan. It's critically important for Taiwan that we understand the complexities and appreciate the efforts that go into making Taiwan's democracy continue to work. Thank you.
Thank you.
Would you like to say a few words in response?
Yeah, I guess. Well, thank you for that. That was high praise from someone I have a lot of respect for. Yeah, I mean, in terms, I agree with the not dancing on the grave thing. That's, you know, like it's very important for democracies to have decorum, because as you see in I'm American, as you see in my country, you know, it's really it's getting pretty nasty quite quickly. But one thing I would say about the Great Recall is, so actually the KMT also tried to recall DPP legislators, but they didn't get enough votes, right? Yeah. So they're definitely you know, they're wrestling in the mud. I mean, the DPP and KMT they do these performative kind of brawls on the floor of the parliament. So there's and I think, you know, for some Taiwanese people, there's so you've got like maybe 25%, a quarter are diehard KMT, a quarter are diehard DPP, and then like there's a half of the voters in the middle, 50% in the middle, who are kind of swing voters. Yep. And they just kind of take it election by election and vote according to their own interests. But I think for the hardcore Greens, I think it won't really be a democracy until the opposition is a loyal opposition in their eyes. And the KMT's rapprochement with the after Chen Shui-bian's re-election in 2005, the KMT and CCP basically said, like, hey, you know, like we you know, that was a family squabble, you know, like we're more or less the same, and like this Taiwanese identity is a growing problem for both of us and both of our, you know, goals. But I think for some Taiwanese people, for the Deep Greens, once there is no KMT, you know, the Chinese Nationalist Party, once it's either gone or just such a minority that it's irrelevant, I think that's when the DPP would likely break up into like 4 different Taiwanese
parties, and then it would be more like you'd have like liberals and conservatives and stuff like that, right? I mean, the DPP since its inception, I mean, it was an extension of the Dangwai movement, which was like when opposition parties were illegal in Taiwan. It was basically a movement against the KMT, and then when they formed as a party in 1986, which was 1 year before the end of martial law, it was actually illegal to form that opposition party. But there was little Zhang Jingguo to do at that point, I think. But when they formed, it was these different factions of Taiwanese with very different goals. But they had the common denominator was getting rid of the KMT, and at that time overthrowing the ROC. That coalition has become a much more mature party, but there's still these factions. But one thing that's interesting is the majority of them are okay with the ROC now. It's kind of like they look at Taiwan maybe as like a car that was stolen by the Blues, and they wanted to steal it back and reclaim it and then paint it green. But they've had the presidency three terms in a row, or three presidents in a no 3 terms in a row now, yeah. And I think they're kind of like, we can drive a blue car. At least we've got a car, I mean, it's like they're becoming more pragmatic. So yeah, there's a lot of moving parts, but yeah, I think there is also rising distrust and kind of animosity, not U.S. levels, but there disinformation and kind of there's all these things that are happening all in democracies elsewhere in the world, and yeah, it's a big test for Taiwan.
I'd just say one thing, because I think Chris, I appreciate how, if you were to look at democracies and you sense this kind of democratic erosion that we're seeing, you're seeing the tails of the distribution really sort of being amplified in ways that we've not seen before. Because to your point, you have deep greens, you have deep blues, but it's still a pretty normal distribution of preferences. There's still a middle that's quite moderate. That's actually the case in the US as well.
Yeah.
That's the case in South Korea, where there's also big fears of political polarization pulling the democracy apart. It's also the case in Brazil, where we're seeing the Supreme Court there ruling against Bolsonaro, the Supreme Court in South Korea ruling against former President Yoon. So, I think that the warning that you're offering us as well is that amidst the polarization that is capturing the headlines, most people living in Taiwan, just like most Americans, are actually still kind of somewhere in the middle. They're just being drowned out by the tails. And that makes me worried when you have very loud voices at the tails drowning out the discourse of the majority, right? And so, you're absolutely right in terms of public opinion polling and so on, that the middle is still really large in Taiwan. That's actually where most voters are. And that for me is sort of the hope for democracy over the longer term.
Agreed.
Great. We have about 20 minutes left, so why don't we just open the floor to questions? I'm sure there's a lot of interest in the topic this time. Yes, please, gentlemen in the front there. Do we have a microphone?
Here, you can take my microphone.
Oh yeah, there we go. Over here in the middle. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Columbus Leo, and this is a very great presentation and discussion. You mentioned that during Japanese time, they brought a lot, including women's schools. I just wanted to add to that it was actually Reverend Joseph Leslie Mackay near Oxford County, 2 hours from here, that went to Taiwan first, married a Taiwanese woman, came back to Oxford County to raise funds, went back to Taiwan to establish the first girls' school.
Oh, wow.
So just to add to that, it's great to have women's education since that time in a part of Asia when it was not often favored. And the other thing, you made a point about when Chen Shui-bian was arrested at the end of his term, the DPP was seen as corrupt, but the KMT was much more corrupt, whereas the DPP was sort of as very clean. And so when it got tainted, that certainly wasn't too good. But still, the KMT is much more corrupt. And today, they are collaborating with communist China in many things. So that's something that very different than most other countries in a democracy where all the parties are for that country, really talking about in different ways. Whereas in Taiwan, you are back to the situation similar to Second World War when some Austrians were collaborating with Nazis to come to take over.
Right.
So that's a situation that in your book is talking about the struggle for survival. So maybe if you can maybe elaborate on that point, the struggle and the type of very unusual situation Taiwan is with one party really collaborating with a possible invader.
Well, yeah, it's a strange situation. You have so, in Hong Kong and Macau, you've got one country, two systems, right? But in Taiwan, I would argue you have one system, two countries. The system being the ROC, and then inside the ROC, under the ROC state apparatus, you have people who are like, I'm Taiwanese, and you have people who are like, I'm Chinese. They're living in two different countries, and it might not. They're not thinking PRC, they're thinking ROC. But it's so that's it's hard to address that, change that in either direction very quickly. But I think people are pretty much like, yeah, there's one thing that I think unifies both sides is a desire to maintain the status quo. And that's the ROC Taiwan is this independent de facto country, but it satisfies the four criteria of the Montevideo Convention and all that. But no, I think polling by the National Zhengzhou University, which is the former party school of the KMT, it was founded in China. So it's not like, a green school by any means. National Zhengzhou University polls, they show that maybe 3% of respondents want unification with the PRC now. There's a lot of people who are like, well, let's give it some time, see what happens over there. There are people who are like, never. There are also people who are like, let's just keep this. I don't know. So there's a lot of nuance in that, but overwhelmingly, Taiwanese people do not want to become part of the PRC right now. And historically, they've never been asked who they want to be. And now, I would argue, it became Taiwan. It was more of an occupation it was more of like a KMT occupation, an ROC occupation of Taiwan until democratization. But democratization is basically what has made Taiwan a country. And every election further consolidates that country. And like for Beijing, I know Taiwan's small and the PRC is quite mighty. But they don't have that legitimacy that the ROC government in Taiwan does, regardless of which party wins. There's the legitimacy bestowed upon the victors by the voters, and that's something that Xi Jinping doesn't have. No one, Xi Jinping gets voted in by a near unanimous. I think it's unanimous. The last few votes of 100 or a couple hundred of his peers in the party. So. It's I'm sure there's a bit of envy or just kind of like we don't have that, and it would be nice to get rid of that, especially so close to their border.
In the front row here.
Hi, Chris. My name is Jaron. I'm a U of T alumni in law, and I did a lot of research paper in Taiwan when I was in law school. So I really enjoy your presentation in general. And so my question will be more regarding about this democratic resilience now in Taiwan. And I follow a lot of Taiwan news recently. I have I'm very anxious with the current situation in Taiwan democracy. Especially, I noticed that DPP use democracy as a very powerful ideological tools to do something against KMT, and especially if you may notice that we got this recall election recently in August. I was also in Taiwan personally to see how this election was organized.
I personally feel this is quite a kind of waste of taxpayers' money for doing that. So my concern would be eventually in the future with more pressure from mainland China, national security and as well as democracy would become something to use against democracy. And I would feel that is as like, so my question would be like, do you think Taiwan's struggle to survive will be a survival of a nation as a Taiwan identity or a more survival of a democracy? Those two are now closely connected, but at some point they may not eventually, especially considering the current strikes situation between China and Taiwan.
Yeah, well, there's a big talking point by the KMT and the blue side is that we've entered a period of green terror, which is a bit disingenuous and disrespectful to the victims of the white terror, because if you look at like political violence, historically the KMT has done way more to Taiwanese people to the green side of the aisle than the other way around. I mean, I'm not aware of any green killings of KMT or blue folk in Taiwan, but you have tens of thousands of Taiwanese who are killed by the KMT and then imprisoned, tortured, and all that, and also a lot of blue Chinese people who are also tortured, imprisoned, executed by the KMT. So that's it's also with the pressure coming from China, and that pressure is now in the legislative yuan too. So it's like I start off the book saying, you think your job, you think your job sucks. Lai Ching does. You spare a thought for Lai Ching. I mean, he's got two Chinese ethno-nationalist parties, kind of getting in the way of what he's trying to do for Taiwan. And I think with these joint military exercises, the attempts to infiltrate the military and the Taiwanese government by Beijing, and just all these things that are going on, you have to increase national security alertness and readiness, but also you have to maintain your democracy, and it's a difficult balance, and is Lai getting it right? I'm not sure, but I don't know. I'm not sure what I would do better in his situation. It's really not a very easy, and it's not a normal situation to be in. Taiwan is it's a country, but it's a country like no other, and it's one of the things it's always had to do is kind of whoever's running the show, they've always had to do things with with one hand tied behind their back, and there's a lot of constraint on what can be done. You can't just, it's not recognized by all but 12 countries in the world, and so that makes it hard. You can't just go to DC and meet with the president. You've got to kind of go through back channels and stuff like that. So yeah, I think it's a tough time for Taiwan's democracy, and I guess we'll just see how things play out, but hopefully for the best.
Yes, over here.
Hi there, yes. I'm in the Republic of Ireland and also in Northern Ireland. There have been histories of having Greens and Blues. In the Republic, the Greens were more like, because when Ireland became a country, it was a dominion of the British Empire. So the Blues were saying, let's work with Canada and Australia and so forth to try to build the rights of all dominions with the empire. Whereas the Greens were saying, no, we should have a republic right away. And in Northern Ireland, there's Greens and Blues and Yellows, because you've got the Greens who are like, let's have United Ireland, there's Blues who are staying with the UK, and the Yellows, the Alliance Party, who are more like, let's not focus on the border so much and more focus on like day-to-day issues like the National Health Service and so on. And things have gotten very kind of nuanced in the ways that things have developed over the last 100 years worth of partition. But ironically, Ireland as a country is not necessarily, doesn't have a Taipei economic office, and it does. It has one in Dublin, but there's not one in Taiwan. And I'm not entirely sure if you're familiar with there being a lot of scholarship in Taipei in places like Tada and Shida towards either side of the Irish border. And so I guess my question would be, do you think that going forward, it might be an idea to take a closer look at both sides of the Irish border, especially when it comes to responding to things like the Ukraine war and refugee crises and so forth, whatever that, especially affecting politics in the Republic, but to a lesser extent in the North as well. as a compare and contrast in a European context, that might be the closest you can find to what's going on in Taiwan there. Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, actually, as it happens, my first talk that I've done on this book tour was to a group of 20 Irish retirees in Kilrush, County Clare, at the local public library, and they knew nothing about Taiwan. They were all very smart. I kind of gave my spiel and then answered their questions, but yeah, once they heard about Taiwan's story, pretty a very bullet point version of Taiwan's story, they saw a lot of similarities. One thing that really struck me was how almost dead the Irish language is compared to Taiwanese Minanyu. It's like, the amount of time that the English were in Ireland, it's definitely longer than martial law in Taiwan. But yeah, really seeing how there's attempts to breathe life back into Irish and make it a daily language, but it looks like a pretty uphill climb. But yeah, I think there's a lot of similarities between the two sides, and I don't think Irish know much about Taiwan, and Taiwanese don't know much about the Irish. But I mean, Taiwanese also, they didn't know much about Eastern or Central Europe until recently, and since 2019, I would say, when Lithuania got the bully treatment from China after allowing a Taiwan economic representative office to be opened in Vilnius. I think that really China's reaction to that, I think, awakened a lot of it really raised a lot of eyebrows in the Baltics and also Poland and Czech Republic, and now all those countries are getting they're getting quite close they're getting much more interested in Taiwan. One thing also, my book, it's the first two languages that I sold rights to other than English are Polish and Czech, and there will be a traditional Chinese edition out in the first half of next year as well. But yeah, it's also Ireland is the UK, India, and Ireland are my top three markets so far for the book in terms of sales. So that's kind of interesting. But yeah, I think, hopefully I saw my book at a few bookstores in Dublin, and it was very cool to see, but kind of prominent spacing. So hopefully it'll be a chance for maybe a bit more a deeper discussion between the Irish and the Taiwanese to start. Thank you.
Yeah, great question. Thank you. Over there on the side there.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Lauren. I'm a student activist and advocate for Taiwanese democracy and independence is also part of my work. You mentioned that the recognition of indigenous people, which I appreciate a lot. Well, Professor Wang mentioned that Taiwan is liberal for supporting gay marriage and public health system, and we also say that Taiwan can help become the promotion of its international position. But I also noticed that the trend of raising conservatism in Taiwan, for example, Taiwan could become the first for foreign government to make a direct financial contribution to Israeli settlement, which is illegal under international law. And we also say the current Lai Ching-te's government has a very different style from Tsai Ing-wen's government, especially considering its relation with the Trump's US. I wonder, how do you think about it? Is it necessary because of Taiwan is being threatened by China's invasion, and it has a very special geopolitics, or it is actually should be a concern because it's against indigenous community, democracy, and humanity? Thank you.
Thank you. That's a great question. I don't know if I'm in a position to tell the Taiwanese government what to do or the Taiwanese people what to do, but I do recognize that it's obvious that a lot of people in Taiwan are more in support of well, there are some who are very much seeing the Israeli side of things, and there are others who are seeing the Palestinian side of things. But I think also just the U.S.-Israeli relationship, especially now under Trump, kind of going against Israel at this moment would at a moment where like you have an incoming. I can't remember. He's going to be high up in the Defense Department, but he just called for Taiwan to spend 10% of its GDP on defense, and 10% of its GDP is like it's like almost the entire government budget. Like
sounds like Rich Colby. But
no. I think he was more like 5, which is still like more than Taiwan could do. But there's growing voices in the Trump administration that are kind of critical of Taiwan. So I think I'm not sure about Lai Ching-te's personal beliefs, but I think there is an element of doing what he thinks is necessary to stay on board, to stay in in Trump's good graces to whatever extent is possible. And so is there some I think a lot of Taiwanese people see hypocrisy in the things that you're talking about, and but then I think there's also a lot who are like, when you have when you're in a situation like this, when you're drowning, anyone offering you a rope, you're not going to be like, testing their ideological purity or their background or what they're doing over there. You're just looking to survive yourself. But yeah, it's a very touchy subject, and there are people who are vehemently pro-Israel and vehemently pro-Palestine, and then there's a lot also kind of in the middle who are just like, I don't know about that, but it's I don't know if that answered your question at all. I'm not sure if I can say what or should say what the Taiwanese government should do, but it's definitely a big discussion that's occurring right now.
Thank you.
So I wanted to be sure I wasn't going to speak at all, but I got it. One of the tragic ironies for Taiwan is that the progressives in Taiwan have to ally with the Republicans in the US. And that's always been, I found, a real challenge, right?
Xiaobi Kim, the current vice president, she's done a good job of threading that needle, I would say.
I think now it's a little, since the Pelosi visit, I think that things have changed, but historically, the Republicans have always sided a little bit more, don't you think?
I think there's been a lot more, you hear more noise from the Republicans. They've been a lot more vocal.
Well, it's more anti-China.
Right. Especially during the Cold War. But also, I think that's one of the few things in American politics where you've had like really strong agreement, at least in Congress, like bipartisan agreement that Taiwan must remain sovereign. And so like I've met with delegations, and whenever there's a delegation, it's always a bipartisan delegation, and they're it's Democrats and Republicans saying the same stuff, and they're on the same page, and I'm like, wow, this is cool. Can't we do this like with other stuff? But apparently they can't. So but I do feel like there are kind of cracks on the Republican side that are showing, and that's a little concerning from a Taiwanese perspective. I think a lot of people in Taiwan who are watching, watching DC, they're very concerned about like kind of this like emerging, Bridge Colby is a good example. What the Deputy Undersecretary of Policy for Defense Department, and for East Asia. But saying like we should try to keep Taiwan, but try to keep Taiwan sovereign. Try to deter China. But if they're not going to spend, then maybe we could get along without them. And I think that's very callous and closed-minded. I think it's something to keep an eye on, and it's a trend that has a lot of people in Taipei worried. But I think this is also driving greater. So recently, one thing that I've found quite noteworthy is you've got a lot more cooperation. It's pretty low level and quiet, but between Taiwan and Japan, and Taiwan and the Philippines, and the Philippines and Japan. September 11th this year, the Philippines Japanese entered into a mutual access agreement, I think it's called, but basically they can station their troops and military hardware on each other's territory. Japan invaded the Philippines within living memory, so that was a pretty big mental hurdle to get over. But the Philippines defense minister was just like, look, China's driving us together, and Lin Jialong, the current foreign minister of Taiwan, just visited Manila with a Taiwanese and American delegation. Things are starting to get a bit more out in the open. People are starting to worry less about upsetting Beijing, because, well, Beijing is always upset anyways, right? So I mean, it's kind of like, they used to be really careful with their anger. I lived in China from 1998 to 2013. And it wasn't like this constant anger from Beijing. It wasn't like that. It was very selective. It was like, oh, the French president met with the Dalai Lama. All right, give Carrefour a hard time, or protest against the French. But now they're just angry at everybody. And so I think there's been this hyperinflation of Chinese anger. It means less than it used to before, which actually creates a lot more room for people to just be like, hey, Taiwan, want to hang? You want to chat?
Well, thank you so much. We are unfortunately at the end of our time, so we'll have to end on that note. But thank you so much, Chris, and to Joe for the excellent comments as always. I learned a lot, and I thought the audience questions were also very informative and thoughtful. So thanks again, and I would like to remind you that there will be a book signing across the aisle that'll immediately commence after the event, so you'll get to ask additional questions to Chris as he signs your very own copy of the book. So thank everyone.